Hi everyone, welcome to day 8 of Vlogmas, or 13 days of Joshua. Today I'm giving you what the title suggests, my top 15 most anticipated releases for 2023. Before we begin, I want to make it clear, this is not a comprehensive list by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, 15 books isn't that many. In fact, I would say that some of my books here that I'm pulling from are probably largely came from recommendation lists, came from Thomas from SFF 180, as well as Bethany from Beautiful Bookish Bethany. Those are probably the two biggest booktubers I pulled from, but I recommend you go to their channels to look for a comprehensive list of all the things that are coming out. But for me, I wanted to fixate on this small subset of everything coming out, on the books that appealed most to me. So think of this as my top 15 most anticipated. I mean, it's by definition, but think of it as those that are especially exciting to me, those that I'm most likely to actually pick up and read in the next 12 months. So I'm approaching this sort of from my least excited to my most excited. So my most excited is the very end. But I do want to start with two, not honorable mentions because they're counted in my 15, but they're two books that are slated to be released. But there's no cover and there's no firm deadline of when they're actually coming out other than in 2023. But the problem here is that, of course, that on Goodreads, it could just be someone mistakenly said that. It wasn't official from the publisher. Nevertheless, I want to still include them here because I'm still holding out hope that both of these get released. First up, System Collapse by Martha Wells from the Murderbot Diaries. Martha Wells has another book, full-length book coming out this year. I'm going to tell you it's not on this list. I am actually intrigued by that book, but it's not one that I consider most excited. It doesn't necessarily tick all the boxes that I need for a really exciting book. But this one, of course, does. I know I'm invested in this world and in, I guess, the story of Murderbot and his attempt to assimilate into the human society as a AI who doesn't quite fit in to the general expectations of humanity. We didn't get one last year, I don't think. This year, I mean to say, 2022. So I'm hoping that this says it's releasing November 2023. I'm hoping that might actually come to fruition. That is pushing it, though, of course, so it might end up getting pushed off to 2024. Nevertheless, I'm holding out hope. In the same vein, the Martian Contingency Book 4, the Lady Astronaut series, it may or may not be the last one, I'm not entirely sure. But as the name suggests, this is alternative history where basically an asteroid hits Washington and it uproots the entire political structure of the United States and of the world, because it also is facilitating climate change to a point where there's going to be global cooling, global heating within a matter of decades. So they have to, especially fast, create the space program and then get into space and make a settlement on Mars. This series is at its core hopeful and inspirational, but while still being grounded in, I think, very realistic scenarios, very realistic characterization of everyone who's on the screen for the most part, and I think really sound science. Like the science and engineering, she has this really fine line, that is to say Mary Robinette Kowal, of talking about the science and engineering in a way that feels real and honestly is rooted in realness as someone who is an expert in the field, but not so deep that you can't follow. And that's just such a beautiful art of science writing and science fiction writing that I just love about Mary Robinette Kowal's writing, which is why I'm so psyched for this book. And it would be the top of the list if it wasn't for the fact that I don't actually know it's coming out. I have a tiny bit of hope that it actually will. Okay, next up we have Dead Country, book 1 of the Craft Wars by Max Gladstone, co-author of the the Time War. Not Another Time War. That seems like another teen movie. That's something about a time war. And I really loved that book. It was short and really well written and beautifully written. And I read his newest horror sci-fi book that came out this last year, or this year, 2022. Like a mix of almost Lovecraftian with quantum realm type shit. And the crafting was really well done. Even the writing was really good. But it ended up being overly long, and I kind of lost interest by the end of it. And I don't want to give up on Max Gladstone because there's so much going for him from his ideas and his ability to execute it, at least on the surface, as well as his just beautifully gorgeous writing. And I really want to like him as an author. And if this comes out and I read it and I really love it, I might end up giving this little book another try. Because I was 80% into it. I just realized I didn't care anymore. And I'm hoping that maybe it wasn't the book, maybe it was just me. There's just so much about Max Gladstone as an author that should be perfect for me. In this case, we're talking about Tara Abernathy, who resurrected gods, pulled down monsters, averted wars, and saved a city twice. But she left her town. This is after she left her town, of course. And now she's returning because her father died. So this is this sort of urban fantasy horror book that seems to deal with, gods and monsters. Okay, next up is an author who I wanted to read but haven't actually read, Christopher Golden, All Hallows. And he has a book that I really should prioritize over this, but I'm not promising that I will at this point because this one seems way more intriguing. His other book is called Ararat. Basically, it's an isolated horror book about climbing a mountain. But this is one that intrigues me, not because I know a lot about the author, but because of the design, the structure of it. It's basically 80s nostalgia of Stranger Things, the horror drama, two families are unraveling, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, I don't care about the synopsis. Usually I don't want to hear, this book is like this. But for me, when I hear 1980s nostalgia, Stranger Things, with an author who seems to have a good track record for making a good horror book, a good unnerving horror book, it's kind of enough for me. I can see it being kind of tropey and it's 80s nostalgia because it's been done so much now. But if it's done right, it could be extremely good. And so I'm just going to go in with that hope. Next up is Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. And this is defined as a gripping debut supernatural horror about a young Cree woman whose dreams lead her to a perilous journey of self-discovery and ultimately forces her to confront the toll of a legacy of violence on her family, her community, and the land they call home. And without getting into the details of the synopsis, I'm intrigued. I love a good horror book, and I love one that seemed to be rooted in some magical realism or fantasy, and one that deals with family drama and sort of trauma. That really was enough to pull me in here. So I'm actually really intrigued here, and it's one of those books that I'm okay going in knowing a little bit less. You might see a trend here with a lot of horror books. I think it's inherent that horror books just appeal to me more than other books, which is why there are going to be a lot of them on here. Next up is a book that caught my eye because of the gorgeous cover, but it kept me interested because of the intriguing synopsis. The Haunting of Alejandra by V. Castro. This is advertised as a woman is haunted by a Mexican folk demon, La Llorona, as she unravels the dark secrets of her family history in this ravishing and provocative horror novel. And yet again, like Bad Cree, this is a book that seems to be dealing with cultural fantasy horror and family drama / trauma. And again, for the same reason as the last book, this one just really intrigues me. I know La Llorona has been famous recently because of a horror movie. I never actually watched that because I heard it was bad. But still, I love a good horror demon haunting. I'm a big fan of paranormal / fantasy horror. Yet again, I'm intrigued for the same reasons, and I'm even more intrigued because of this cover. Next up is the newest book, or a new book, by Arcady Martin. I say newest because she has actually 2 books coming out in 2023, I think. This one's a novella. It's basically about a house that is AI. Like every part of it is structured to be integrated into the AI. And its owner apparently has died. And now it has closed itself up, blocked off due to protocols. And I stopped reading the synopsis at that point. But honestly, it was very easy to throw this on this list once I did read that. I really liked Arcady Martin's text on duology. I struggled with the first book. It was a bit much. But this is a book that delves into, I don't want to say light sci-fi, but it's not as epic as a space opera, which is what her other series was. And so I think it'll be more accessible. And based off of my enjoyment of the way she sort of explored these complex themes, interlaced with her just a really enjoyable writing, I am really intrigued by the premise of this book. I think it will actually work really well. I'm going in very hopeful here. Next up is Nothing But Rain by Naomi Salmon. A sleepy little town discovers its memories have become part of the water cycle in Naomi Salmon's debut novel, Nothing But Rain. And without getting into the synopsis, honestly, I am into that premise here. Effectively, there seems to be this thing happening where it rains, you have memories, and then those memories sort of evaporate and something goes away. I'm not sure exactly how the analogy ties in because I sort of stopped reading the synopsis yet again. That premise just seems really intriguing, and it's obviously there's a lot you can do with that as far as the themes they want to explore, as far as how we sort of lose memories with time, or maybe you're erasing certain traumas, or I don't know. It's just so much about experience has to do with our memories. And I'm really curious to see what this author does with this premise, especially since it's a novella. I love a good novella. When it's done effectively, it can hit so hard. Now on to authors I have read. Well, the first of several, that is, not exclusively those. We have Victor LaValle, Lone Woman. And this is one that is historical fiction horror. I don't know a lot about it. I don't need to. I have read several for Victor LaValle. I need to read more of his works. But I have learned that he's a really good writer. I really enjoy reading his works. I'm not sure I've read a historical fiction by him. Historical fiction is not my favorite genre or even subgenre, but I'm trusting he will be able to make use of it to make it a very effective horror story. Let's see, blue skies, empty land, and enough room to hide away from horrifying secret. Or is there? I don't know if it's Wild West, but the Western historical fiction horror going on. I don't want to read the synopsis more than that, so that's where we're leaving you. Next up is a new author. The trees grew because I bled there in collected stories. Can you guess what the main genre is of this collection? It is horror. I mean, the cover and the bleeding is kind of obvious there, but it's a set of horror short stories by a queer non-binary author. And when I see those things all combined into one, short stories, horror, queer, and not to mention the cover and the really intriguing title, it was enough to pull me in. I don't know much about the actual content of the short stories, other than the genre. Even the synopsis doesn't get very deep. It just says it's tense and it's terrifying and it's dark fiction. And I think there's good reason to suspect I'll really like this. So I will be keeping an eye out for this collection. It's one that I'm going to try and motivate myself to read. It looks really, really intriguing. Now let's talk about the two NetGalley arcs that I was struggling with putting on my 5-star prediction list. If you watched that video, you'll know that I talked about 2 books that I was struggling picking from. The one that I didn't choose, that is first in this list, would be Pinata by Leopoldo Gault. It's described, again, I don't like using the things of like, if you like this, you should read this. But again, this is one of those situations where I can't help but say I do love these 2 things, which is A Head Full of Ghosts meets Hereditary in Pinata. And that alone, it just really intrigues me. I hate that it intrigues me. I don't want to be pulled in by something so superficial. But I do love Hereditary. It is my favorite thing in the world. But again, we have family drama and trauma in this horror-rich supernatural world. Carmen Sanchez is back in her home country of Mexico, overseeing the renovation of an ancient cathedral and a boutique hotel. She's there with her daughters, but I think she's leaving because there's been a series of injuries going on in the area. But when she gets home in New York, shit starts to hit the fan, and it turns out maybe there is some type of supernatural entity haunting or possessing some of them since they've come back. I mean, the premise is intriguing, and then once we think about the fact that it's going to be exploring family drama, family history, I think it's easy to see why this appeals to me. Moving on to Our Share of Night by Marina Enriquez. This is a translated work that's being released in 2023, I think March or sooner. But the original copy, of course, was first published in 2019. And again, we're dealing with family history, family trauma. This is described as, his father could find what was lost. His father knew when someone was going to die. His father had talked to him about the dead who rode in the wind. The dead travel fast. Effectively, his father has a special ability to, I think, speak to the dead or something. And he's a part of this group, almost like a cult, who uses him for his abilities. And now I think he's dying or something, and his son is meant to replace them. But part of the act of this sort of communicating with the dead seems to have some satanic or occultish connections in a way that seems very dark, while also just exploring this family's history and I guess, drama. Again, I think there's a recurring theme here. I love a good family drama intermixed with some good supernatural horror. I didn't realize, honestly, I feel like every single one of these, almost every single one is horror. That was not intentional. Now we're on to Don't Fear the Reaper, Book 2 of the Lake Witch Trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones. I adored his last book, My Heart's a Chainsaw, in this series. I read it specifically because this one was coming out, and I loved the little hook in the cover. It intrigued me enough to pick up the first one. But also, I think it says that maybe it might be his first series, and I was intrigued by that idea too. The first one explores similar themes to his other books, which is to say we have this character who loves horror, and is obsessed with it, and is convinced that there's a slasher going on in their town. This book continues that journey. I really liked what the first book did. It had that love of horror intermixed with exploring mental health and the intersection of horror with mental health. Not just with our character, but I think at large. And I'm curious to see where it goes from here. And then next up we have Tanner Reeve-Dew's newest book for the first time in years. That is The Reformatory, a novel which is historical fiction horror, which is something she's done several times. So far my favorite book by her is, oh, actually, no. I was going to say The Good House, but actually it might be The Between. So I love saying that I have two favorite books by her. But still, I'm excited for this one to see what she does. She's a really good horror writer, crafting a very unnerving and horrific scenario. But at the same time, she was highly educated, I guess, understanding Black history and I guess what it means to be Black. And she has a really intriguing and beautiful way of crafting that into her story in a way that really contributes to the unnervingness of the horror in the book. As far as what it's actually about, well, I guess I haven't actually read the synopsis before this. A gripping page-turning novel set in Jim Crow, Florida, that follows Robert Stephen Jones as he's sent to a segregated reform school that is a chamber of terrors where he sees the horror of racism and injustice for the living and the dead. It seems to be alluding to like a haunting, like you're in this horrible situation, add on top of that ghosts. That seems to be what it's alluding to from my perspective here. And then finally, the one book I haven't mentioned that I included in my 5-star prediction list, I feel like it should be known. My most anticipated book for 2023 is going to be the new Wayward Children series, Lost in a Moment and Found. And I want to stress, yet again, though I said this already in other videos, I am excited for this book in a way that I haven't been for other Wayward Children series. That's not to say I haven't been excited, because I have been. I love this series, it's probably my favorite of all time. Let's just read the description. A young girl discovers an infinite variety of worlds in the standalone tale in the Hugo and Nebula Award-winning Wayward Children series, Lost, Alone, and Found. And really, it's that infinite variety of worlds. It reminds me of The Magician, that is the first book in the Narnia series. Of course, The Magicians, the TV show on Sci-Fi based off of its own trilogy of books by Lee Grossman or something. And of course, the worlds that we're exploring already in Wayward Children series, there's an infinite variety of them. But this seems to be suggesting that we have doors or something that allows her to explore a numerous variety of them in this single story. And to me, I love that kind of narrative, and I'm really intrigued to see that type of story within a series that I already adore so very much. And that concludes the top 15 books I am most excited for in 2023. I wish I could say there was variety here, because I'm realizing I don't think I had a single nonfiction book. Maybe I should do a nonfiction anticipated list, because there are nonfiction books I'm excited for. I think it's hard to say I'm super excited for, because nonfiction books, I get intrigued by the premise, but the ones that I really adore and love, I won't know that I love and adore them until I've read it. It's about how it explores it and how that resonates with me on a personal level that makes it really strong. So I may end up revisiting this, talking about the books that are coming out next year in nonfiction that I'm intrigued by, but really there was just a whole slew of nonfiction backlists that I want to read. So that's another reason why I haven't been keeping an eye on new nonfiction lists. But I'm rambling. This is my top anticipated list. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know which ones are you most excited for. As always, hope you all stay safe, and I'll see you tomorrow on the next day of my vlogmas. Goodbye.